I always thought that competitive sports meant a natural competition, a motivation, an incentive, a desire to want to be the very best. That's what we always teach our kids, no matter what it is that we do, what they want to do in life. And it seems to me that by taking any kind of a performance-enhancing anything, you are taking away the naturalness of wanting to achieve, of wanting to be the best, of wanting to grow. It says, just pump me up, and you have a good business thing here, and put me out.
To whom specifically is your question or statement directed?
It's not really a question. It's just a confusion.
Right.
It's a confusion as to why it's not a matter of death. It's a matter of life. Why would drugs even be permissible under any level?
Dr. Fost, a brief response.
Like Karnak, I can answer the question without even knowing the question.
Place an envelope to your forehead when doing so in that case.
That's a nice notion about sports, and it's certainly what we ought to promote for our kids, but it hasn't been what sports has been about at an elite level for 7,000 years, and that's why I mentioned the Babylonians. If you took the steroids and the growth hormone away, what you would have is literally 1,000 other things that athletes do to enhance their performance, none of them natural. Athletes drink Gatorade from a factory. They take pasta to carbo load that's made from a factory. They don't eat potatoes out of the ground to carbo load. They put on fancy shoes. They train at altitude. They do everything. There's no athlete since the beginning of time who competed naturally to win a race.
Doctor, I got to interrupt. You're comparing drinking Gatorade to taking anabolic steroids?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying.
What are you? Well, then why bring it up?
I'm saying what she said. It should be just about nature, just people by their own natural ability. I don't know a single athlete who relies on his or her own natural ability to compete.
Do you think a hypoxic air tent is natural? Is that a hypoxic air tent? This is what all US athletes use to boost their red cell count.
Well, my understanding is the reason why they do it is to level the playing field with those that live at high altitude, which this training is readily accessible and permissible. But performance-enhancing drugs are not permissible.
To the audience. To the audience, yes.
I'm Sarah Shorno with the Huffington Post. And this question is more for those against the motion, maybe particularly Mr. Pound. Setting the legalities aside and the fact that it's against the rules, what difference do you see, if any, between an athlete using performance enhancers to stay in the game and, say, an actress using injections and cosmetic surgery to stay in the movies?
Because what we've agreed in sport...
But setting the rules aside is what I'm saying. I mean, you mentioned a lot of ethics and you mentioned a lot of unfair advantages. So using those two examples that you've used, what do you see the difference is?
Well, you have to have rules in order to have sport. You can't have sport without rules. It's not the world's shortest rule book I know is Australian rules football. Get ball to end so I don't think you can compare that. We're talking about sport. What pianists or actresses do.
I understand sport, but one of the arguments that you used is the ethics of it. That it's against the rules because it's unethical and because it's unfair.
No, it's backwards. It's unethical because you have agreed to the performance of a particular skill in a particular way, and you've broken that promise. You've cheated on your fellow competitor. That's what's unethical.
So then do you think that if it were to be accepted in sports, that it would then still be unethical? Or if they did allow steroids within sports, would it then be ethical to use them?
It would not be unethical to use them. That's right. No, it's the rule.
John Frankel, HBO's Real Sports. First thing is your statistic of 90% permanent disability in the NFL is way off, and I've done pieces criticizing the NFL, so it's not fair to invoke that statistic.
What is the right number?
Well, there is no real number. There's no way to know what permanent disability is, and that's been one of the long-running arguments.
How are you defining permanent disability, Dr. Fost?
I was just quoting a New York Times study of people who weren't able to perform activities of daily living, I think was the definition, but I don't remember it precisely.
John?
But if you have a different number, I'd like to know what it is.
Well, what I really would like to get at is you are talking about the fact that there are no or minimal side effects when it comes to steroids, and you're comparing adults versus youth. I haven't turned on a television, seen a commercial for some sort of medicine that doesn't spend half its time telling us about the side effects. So I dare find it hard to believe that steroids don't have some side effects that ultimately have serious health implications. You all on this side of the panel for the motion seem to suggest that any advantage, whether it's drinking caffeine or such, is a good advantage, so it is worth doing. So I wonder whether you advocate insider trading in that way, because it clearly gives us an advantage. My other point is to the kids, and it's been brought up by the side against the motion, and that is, why should my son, who at 8 years old, who already watches Barry Bonds, when he gets to the high school level, and there's a kid who plays second base, he knows is taking something, and all he wants to do is play second base on his high school baseball team. He may not even want to make it to college or to the pros. He just wants to play at the high school level. Inevitably, he's going to be faced with that decision of, should I take or should I not?
All right. Are all advantages positive advantages? And what about the scenario that John Frankel just laid out? Who wants to respond? Radley?
I'll take the first part if you want to take the second. Look, I don't know what advantages are harmful and what advantages are helpful. I mean, my position on this is that part of the problem is what we don't know, because everything is black market and is under this veil. I think my point is that we need to lift that veil and trust adults to make their own decisions about what risks they're going to take.
Norm?
I think your son we should do everything we can to stop him from smoking, from drinking, from using steroids and other things that are harmful, and that he is not in a position to make informed choices. So I'm in favor of whatever we can reasonably do to prohibit it, make it illegal, make it criminal, to test, to use kids as indicators for these activities when they're occurring. So I'm completely sympathetic to your concern, and I think we should do everything we can to stop it.
We apologize to all those audience members who had good questions of their own, but because of time, we have to move on to the summation portion. But before we do that, let me pose a question to this side of the table. It's often tossed out, well, people use various medications for this reason or that. Or the woman from the Huffington Post used the example of an actress who might resort to plastic surgery as she ages, or there are performance enhancers of various kinds. But isn't that a specious argument, because there is no objective competition for who has the fewest wrinkles? And I don't mean to be flippant, but if there were some kind of competition that people cared about and that people entered into in good faith and that had an ongoing history that people cared about, and that competition entailed how frequently and with what level of effectiveness one could perform sexually, then perhaps you might have to put in rules against the use of Viagra, one competitor to another. But that doesn't apply to the use or the suggested use of Viagra. It doesn't apply to the suggested use of plastic surgery. In competitive sports, which are conducted with a structure and with objective rules and goals, it seems to me that whatever anyone uses for performance enhancement of one kind or another outside those spheres is an analogous response.
No, I agree. I mean, but we keep going back to the rules here, and none of us is advocating breaking the rules. I mean, the purpose of this debate tonight is to determine. We're debating what those rules ought to be. I'm not saying that once you enter into an agreement with the league that says you will not use this list of substances, I'm not defending people who then go and use those substances. I mean, that's fraud, basically. What we're debating here is what those rules ought to be.
But you would agree that what is used outside competitive sports and taken for granted in society really is not a persuasive argument for what should be allowed within competitive sports. You have to make a different argument, and maybe there's a good one, but that isn't it.
I think it's a different argument to say that because we use liposuction or get Botox injections, that's the same as entering into an agreement to have a competition.
If there were a flat abs competition and one guy had to do sit-ups and someone else got liposuction, it wouldn't be a fair competition if anyone cared about that competition.
Absolutely. If you're having a beauty contest and the judge and the criteria is natural beauty, and someone went out and got breast implants and won the competition,
right?
I would object to that. Yes.